Today on the Prior Transformation, I interview Scott Clausen, who is a composer. Scott actually, writes and plays and all those kind of things. Music that you'll see in movies or TV shows. Music you'll hear in TV shows and movies and video games, those kind of things. He's worked on The Simpsons. He's worked on one of my favorite shows. He wrote the music for Better Off Ted. He currently writes for a show called Bizaardvark. So very interesting conversation. We talk about how he has to, drum up new business and how he has to, maintain a set of relationships in a network, and how he kind of got started with that. We talk about his creative process, which is huge. I think a big part of this conversation is, how he has to be creative. I mean, he'll basically get a request to do something and he has to turn it around in days. So how do you, when you don't really feel like doing it, how do you sit down and produce something of high quality that's creative, which is, really surprising to kind of hear that people can do that. So really, really great conversation. So let's get started. Welcome to the Prior Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Smoots. In this podcast, we explore, there's no we, it's just I. I'm the only person here. And really, I just ramble for 2 or 3 minutes on a technology or business topic. And occasionally, I'll interview some smart folks. If you like that kind of thing, enjoy. Welcome back. I'm here with Scott Clausen. Scott, thanks for joining us today.
What's up, Jimmy?
Yeah, man. So you are maybe you can explain what you do, just to kind of.
I am a composer. I write music for TV shows, movies, video games, you name it. And if it's media and it needs music, that's what I do.
Oh, that's really cool. So how'd you get into doing that?
It's something that I grew up around.
Okay.
And it wasn't necessarily something that I had intended to do, but I grew up around it. So I saw that it was a possibility. My father's a composer. It was one of those things where I just grew up around recording studios, professional musicians, saw my dad writing music every day, sitting down on his piano. And music was something I fell in love with at a very early age. I had originally wanted to be more on the touring side of music. Okay. I wanted to play in bands.
Okay.
Like every other guy that does what I do. We all want to play rock and roll and, tour the world and see the world. But there was certain circumstances that happened after college that landed me in a recording studio for a TV composer, and ended up working at a place for about 8 years where I learned the trade and realized that it was actually something I could make a living at. And the rest is kind of history. I've been doing it for about 20 years and still cranking, still kicking.
Yeah, that's cool. So what kind of so is it shows or movies most? Like what do you do most?
I do a little bit of everything, but at this point, my bread and butter is episodic TV. I get contracted to write music for various TV shows. End up doing an entire season of a show. Right now I'm doing a Disney Channel show called Bizaardvark. It's a kids sitcom with lots of goofy songs, and it's something that they contract me to do about 21 episodes at a time. And I hope to land on projects that go more than one season, but I sometimes jump from show to show, and sometimes I'm on a project for, say, 4 or 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think we talked offline and you said that it can be like super demanding schedule-wise, right?
Absolutely.
But then you have off time, like downtime too, right? It's kind of like
sometimes.
Okay.
It depends on how much work you're doing at one time, and the nature of this business is that shows come and go. So you hope to land on something that has some longevity, but you never really have any idea what's gonna hit and what's not. So you always are working in the moment, but then you're also kind of eyeing 9 months down the road what's coming next. So it's a constant battle between working on your current show's workload and then also doing your hustle for the future to make sure that you have work in case the thing that you're on right now doesn't work out. And ultimately what ends up happening lots of times is you have maybe one show going at the moment, and then you have another show that starts up maybe in the middle or towards the tail end of the current project that you're on, and they overlap with each other. Sometimes you're doing more than one show at once. Sometimes I've had as many as 5 at a time. And,
Jesus.
And it's crazy. It's crazy. I'm on one at the moment, which has been nice because it's been the first time in a long time that I've actually had a little bit of breathing room from time to time and get to spend time with my family and get to get outside every so often. But when it's cranking, it's cranking. It's a roller coaster. It can be 7 days a week sometimes, oftentimes. There have been stretches last summer, I think I did 3 months straight without a day off. So it's crazy, man. But you know, I'm making music for a living. So,
yeah, I know. Like,
it can't be that bad. It's you kind of love what you're doing, and when you're in it, when the beauty of working on a TV show is that you're just jumping from one episode to the next. So you are getting this massive turnover of work from one week to the next, where you're seeing new episodes, new content, and when you're in it, you're just firing on all cylinders, and you're not thinking about time. You're not thinking about, oh, is it summer? Is it winter? Like you just work and you get in a flow. And the nature of these shows is they just crank them out. You know, you got 21 episodes to do, depending on the order size. The show I'm on right now is 21. You crank out those 21 episodes, and then you just get to the end, and then maybe take a breather at that point. It's interesting.
Yeah. So how do you get them? Do you get them? Is it, you get like 2 a week, or do you get all 21? And then what kind of content do you get? Do you get like the fully edited version, and then you kind of are working off that, or you get a script, or what's the workflow like?
It's interesting. So the business is changing somewhat. The traditional model is that, we would do an episode once every week, or maybe 3 every 4 weeks. With Netflix and the way that streaming has kind of changed the game with binge watching, there are certain projects now where you get thrown all the content at once. Some guys I know are getting a 13 episode series, and all 13 episodes are getting dumped on their lap at one time.
Wow.
For me, it's much more a week to week type of thing, where I'm working on one episode and sort of anticipating the next one down the road. But at the same time, there's also episodes that are shooting. There's ultimately 2 ends of the process. There's production and there's post-production. And in production, they're shooting an episode that I'm going to ultimately score, say, 4 or 5 weeks down the road. At the same time, that they're doing production on the one episode, I'm working on the episode that they shot maybe 4 or 5 weeks prior. So oftentimes, like with a show like Bizarrevark, which has a ton of songs that they actually have to shoot music videos for, I will be working on a song for the production of a certain episode and then be scoring the post-production process of an episode that had shot 4 or 5 weeks prior.
Wow. So
there's a little bit of a juggle and some overlap, and that happens until production wraps. And then from that point on, I'm just scoring episodes, say 1 a week as they come in.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I get about 4 days to do the episode.
It sounds like that's like not a ton of time, right?
No, not really.
So how do you stay creative? I mean, it seems like that's like, for me at least, I know that I kind of get in the modes where I just can't produce something.
There's not really a choice.
You just got to do it.
Like it's one of those things where if I don't do it, someone else is going to. So I have to do it. It's writer's block. I know it's a thing. Mm-hmm. I just don't have the option to have it necessarily. Which that's not to say that everything that I write comes out amazing. Oftentimes like with time crunches or what have you, and I'm not always going to have my best days in terms of writing. So there have certainly been times when even though I was able to create something, it may not have been the best product in the world, but it's still got to get done. So you sort of compensate for the whole writer's block scenario by just producing.
So it's just like a volume thing.
Yeah.
Just by nature of you just doing it.
Yeah. I mean, you have to do it. Once you're in a rhythm of doing it, it doesn't become that difficult to continuously crank out content. The secret is making sure that content is solid. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the real challenge.
So how do you refine it? Is there like a process that you go through to kind of like narrow in on stuff? Or I know you only have like a couple days, so
it's a little bit of a combination of, I guess, habit. Having done it for so long, knowing what works and what doesn't work, and sometimes you just got to grind it out. It means staying up a little bit later than you may have liked to make sure it's right. And then other times it's just getting in that zone and just letting things happen. It's amazing what can happen if you're able to let go and just be creative. But that also requires understanding the tools you're using, knowing the craft, knowing what you can and can't do. I certainly know my limitations. I always try and push up against them, but then there are certain things where I know it's like, okay, this is out of my wheelhouse. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this the right way. And maybe that means having some people help out, or having, there's certain, like the show that I work on now, Bizarre is a very, I don't want to say a rock heavy show, but it's a show that certainly has a lot of, say, electric guitar. I'm a piano player and I'm a bass player. I'm not a guitar player per se. I can play guitar, but I couldn't get up on stage and like throw down some crazy solo that's going to blow people's minds. So if I have to do something that requires that level of expertise, I know when I can get away with doing the guitars myself. I know when I need to call someone in that's their specialty and have them do it.
And you said you're a piano player, and a bass player. Which one's your primary? Like, which one would you?
I wouldn't.
Interchangeable.
Yeah, interchangeable. It's the way that I work, and the way a lot of composers work these days is we work what's called in the box, where we have to essentially write, record, engineer, mix, music edit, do every step of the process from starting from script to actual final delivery. We sit in a room and do everything, record all the different parts, whether it's guitar, bass, drums, lots of synth programming, samples. I do a ton of orchestral programming. You have to be sort of a jack of all trades. You have to be able to not only write, but then know how to record it and how to make it sound good, and then how to deliver the music in format that post-production houses know how to use. And it's no longer a case of being someone like, say, John Williams, who just puts a pen to paper and like writes music and then has this team of people that work with him realizing all of the creations. Guys that work in the business in the capacity that I do at this point have to do almost everything. And that's why we call it in the box, because it's me in a room with a bunch of gear and just sitting there and coming up with music and recording it and making sure it works with whatever project it is that we're working on.
So is there a limitation on the type of instruments that you can, I guess, you mentioned doing some sampling and stuff like that. Can you pretty much do any instrument at this point with the keyboard? Or are there certain things where you said orchestra, like you wouldn't necessarily need a full orchestra for anymore? And like that
you can do, it's pretty wild what you can get away with now. I've done movies where the entire orchestra is completely programmed from top to bottom.
Wow.
And it doesn't sound like the real thing necessarily, but it gets pretty darn close.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a layperson, you probably wouldn't even notice.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I would,
for you maybe, but
yeah, I mean, I would say the bulk of shows on TV right now do that. They have guys that are programming everything. There's been a little bit of a renaissance with respect to getting back to live music and and recording things the right way. And back when I was working on The Simpsons, that's how we did things. We recorded with a 35-piece orchestra every week and did things in the way that it should be done.
Yeah.
But because of budget limitations,
it's expensive.
It's expensive.
Yeah. You pay
it's
one
no
guy
longer,
or you pay 30, right? I mean,
yeah. So the technology's come a long way where you can get away with a lot just using samples and some programming tricks, and it still requires a certain skill set to be able to make things sound organic. It's not easy to make programmed orchestra sound organic. It requires a certain finesse at programming, probably in a lot of ways that, with the programming you do, there's some creativity involved that goes beyond just the code, right? Yep. You have to be able to know how to manipulate things in a way that make things flow very smoothly and with respect to music, done in a way where things sound warm and real and it can be done. It doesn't sound quite the same, but you can do a pretty good job. You can fool a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, one of the themes that I kind of have on the podcast, I talk a lot about like the future and technology and how it affects a lot of different things. And I mean, so what you do is something that I think could never be replaced by an AI, right? It's because it requires a certain level of what you just said. It's about fitting things together and kind of knowing how things work. I guess maybe
people are trying though. It's something that there are experiments happening where they're trying to get computers to just come up with music and create.
Wow.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, like along with everything else, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Right. How good is that music though?
Yeah,
That's the question. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that good.
Yeah.
But like I saw a thing today where, I think IBM had a computer learning how to debate people. Right. And, it's interesting. Like they're trying to do things that you wouldn't think would really be possible, but it works on a certain level and it's not there yet, but who knows?
Yeah.
Cool. It's hard to say.
So what do you think the future looks like for your industry?
It's an interesting time actually, because it's really funny because when I was working for a music house back in early 2000s. And the composer I worked for at the time was very doom and gloom about the industry. He was convinced that the bottom was going to fall out and that there was no future in what we did. And he subsequently retired at a fairly young age from the business, and which forced me and everyone else working there to jump out on our own, which was a blessing in a lot of ways. But I would say almost the exact opposite has happened from what this guy's a very knowledgeable person about the business. Almost the exact opposite has happened, where the number of opportunities that exist for guys doing what I'm doing has exploded because of the amount of content that's now on the air. There are so many content providers now, and it's just growing at an exponential rate. Everyone wants in the content game. Every company wants to have a streaming app, and they're just building this massive catalog of content, and someone's got to provide music for those. Now, does that mean there's more money in the game? Not necessarily. Fees have gone down quite a bit. And there's also some competing factors with respect to what I do. There are companies out there that provide what's called library music, where it's just stock music. And back in the day, these stock music companies were considered somewhat of a joke. Their music typically wasn't that good. The amount of material available there just wasn't a wealth of material to choose from. These days, the library companies are massive, and the music sounds really good. So there are options available to people that don't necessarily have the budget for a composer or don't necessarily have the time for the process, because it is a process, where they can go to, say, a library company and just say, hey, what do you got that'll work here? And that's very commonplace. Most reality shows are done that way.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about a reality show, they change the music every 30 seconds, right? Yeah. And it jumps from piece to piece to piece every 30 seconds. A gargantuan task for one composer to handle.
Yeah.
But a library that has 10,000 tracks available can, cut a license deal and make an entire catalog available to a show. And so an editor can sit in an edit bay, just pull tracks off a hard drive and drop them in one after another.
Wow. So then the editor's deciding.
So the editor's deciding what works, and they're sort of cutting the show to different types of music. And that's a very prevalent thing now. Now that only works for certain styles of programming for now. I think there will always be a need for custom tailored music for TV shows and movies. Because you want themes, you want a certain sound.
Yep.
But there's so much different type of content that there is a need for libraries. There's a need for composers, and who knows what other methods are going to come along to provide music for these shows. It's hard to say at this point. So the state of the business is interesting because I have to compete with libraries. I have to compete with other composers. There are a lot of talented dudes out there and a lot of talented women out there that are way better than I am. And yet the opportunities, there's never been as many opportunities as there is right now. I do find that I have to work probably twice as hard to make the same amount of money as I did, say, 10 years ago.
Okay.
Which is interesting. Mm-hmm. You would sort of hope it's the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. As you get older, you want to make more.
Yeah.
I personally haven't found that to be the case, but who knows? Maybe if I link up with the right projects, that might change. I'm doing a lot of cable content at the moment, which doesn't necessarily pay as much as, say, network content, or I do a lot of comedies, which don't pay as much as dramas. So there's a ton of factors that influence that. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think the business is thriving. There's a need for it. And I feel like the amount of content is just going to keep growing. Who knows what the point of saturation is with that? But right now, it just seems like everyone wants in the game.
Hey, more people coming online every day.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So it's kind of like, I don't think we're anywhere near that.
Yeah.
Right? We have a long way to go.
And you have companies that are breaking off to do their own thing. Disney's coming out with their app. They want content. I heard about a deal today with Nickelodeon potentially teaming up with Netflix, and there's
that'd be crazy.
Yeah, and so there's like all these moving pieces, but everyone is they're all jockeying to become these catalogs of content because that's where the value is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's cool. So not even really owning distribution at that point. They want to just have the content.
Yeah.
And then cut a deal with Netflix or somebody else.
Or in a case like Disney, it's their own thing.
Do your own
they do their own thing.
Yeah. Cool. So how do you, what's like the procurement process? Like how do you mentioned hustle up, new deals. You have to spend some time doing that.
Yeah.
How does that work? Like, is it like networking? Is it like going to events? Is it, just coffees with people? Like, what's that like?
I used to spend a lot more time networking than I do now. And I think that that's partially because I have relationships in place that I've been able to rely on. This town is so incredibly incestuous with respect to the people that you work with. Like if you work with someone, I can draw what I mean by that, I suppose, is that the show that I'm on now, I can draw a path from project to project to project to project, going back probably 15 years and trace the origin of how I got the show that I'm on now. Because the relationships that you establish on one, if you do well, they tend to stay with you. Like you move from project to project with the people that you've established these relationships with, working relationships. And for me, a lot of it these days is, okay, who do I know that I've worked with in the past that's on a project now? And the majority of the jobs I get come from that, where I have a foundation of projects that I've worked on that all these people have branched off into other shows. And with each time that you link up with one of those people, you meet 5 new people that have the potential to branch off and be someone that you work with in the future.
So it's work. You get work.
You get work from working.
More and working. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I have an agent who tries to procure work for me and has had some success at doing that. But ultimately I think work comes from work, and making sure that you stay on top of maintaining those relationships. Because that's the downside of that system is if you have someone that you've worked with in the past and they move on to a project and you somehow miss the boat on linking up with them on whatever that project is, and that project ends up successful, they're off the grid for 5 years. So you don't have the opportunity to work with that person or for that person for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, wow.
And who knows if it's even going to come back your way, because they've now established new relationships with other people that they're working with.
Yeah.
So that's when I talk about the hustle, a lot of it is seeing what all of your people are doing, what projects they're working on, who's in the middle of something, who is on the tail end of something, who's just starting something, and hopefully you catch people at the exact moment that they need someone like myself to do, to write music for them.
Was there a time that you, I guess maybe back when you first started, where you kind of like broke in and it was like it took you a little while and then you kind of like got that edge? And I know I've talked to some folks and they've kind of talked about how they worked for like 10 years and then it was like nothing, and all of a sudden they got one deal and then it just kind of blew up from there. Was it like that? Was that your experience, or did you have something nice? I know you said, you have friends in the space and stuff. So
yeah, for me, it was a little bit more of a progressive process, because the music house that I worked at for the first 8 years of my career was a very successful music house. So when I walked in the door the first day of work, the place was cranking.
Okay.
The guy was writing music for Seinfeld. He was writing music for Will and Grace. He was doing these big network TV sitcoms, and I walked into a space where I just saw things clicking on all cylinders. I wasn't part of that process, I was working in the office, mailing out like CDs and doing cue sheet work and doing all sorts of administrative stuff. So I sort of got to watch it from a distance. But as I learned how the system worked, I found ways to integrate myself into the process. And by doing that, I was able to latch on to some of the projects that were happening in that building. And it started off as a administrative gig, and then it turned into doing some tech work around the studio and like fixing computers, and then turned into a music editing gig, and then found a way to like do some writing here and there. And then before you know it, towards the end of the 8 years, I was working as a staff composer. And it was, it was like one of those things that there were all these steps to like just work my way up the process of this one operation. Yeah. And then when my old boss retired, then I had to put my big boy pants on and like jump into the real world.
Yeah.
And me and one of my coworkers from that place decided to start a company, because we had some pretty decent credits at that point from working at the old shop. And we said, hey, why don't we just, join forces? And, the two of us are more powerful than us individually, and started a company. And it's really interesting. Like the very first phone call we made to try and land a gig was with one of our old clients at the music house I was working at.
Mm-hmm.
And when I made the call, I just hit them on the right day. It was like it was the strangest thing where I made this phone call, excuse me, and producer of this show picks up the phone and I'm like, hey, Bruce, I'm just wanted to say hi, let you know I got my own company now, doing my thing. And I just want to let you know, if you ever need any music, let me know. And he goes, it's funny you call. And I literally caught this guy right as he was coming out of a meeting where they realized that they had this show to deliver in 3 days and they still didn't have a composer.
Wow.
It was an NBC show with Seth Green that lasted 3 episodes. It was, one of those that came and went. No one has ever heard of it or seen it ever again. Yeah. But it was our first gig.
Yeah.
And it was literally just a case of pure luck with respect to the timing of the phone call, plus having the relationship previously established from working. But he basically said within the course of 5 minutes was like, hey, can you come in for a meeting? Sure. And went in for a meeting and 3 days later delivered the first episode of the show. Wow. It was our first gig. It was our, and from there it was like, okay, we got a gig on NBC. That's a fairly legitimate credit. We can now ride this. And so we turned that into a couple other things and it was a very gradual process. Because none of them were hits. Mm-hmm. Like this show for NBC they ordered 13 of them, and I think it lasted 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Right? It went on the air, and then it was gone.
Yeah.
And, but,
it was NBC, right?
Yeah, it was NBC. It's an NBC credit, Yeah. And so we landed a couple more like that, and same story, it's order 13, we get through like 6 of them, and 3 of them air, and then they pull the plug. Wow. And but we're like great, because they still made all 13. Okay. So like we work on this show that's dead in the water, but we made money to survive. Mm-hmm. Built a couple more credits. And then just gradually, slowly but surely, just started adding some stuff to the mix.
Was it frustrating at all to like have it canceled like that?
Oh, it's the worst. There's no worse feeling than being on a show that's like Dead Man Walking, right?
Really?
Like everyone shows up to dub these shows, and you have 6 of them left to do, and you know that none of them are ever going to air. And no one cares, right?
Oh, wow.
So everyone's like, let's just get through it.
Wait, so you're saying they'll cut the show and then you'll have to keep...
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. So the show gets canceled and you're still working on the show because they ordered 13 of them and they still want to find a way to make money off of it, right? Yeah. So they'll produce 13 of them. They'll package it, maybe go take it overseas and sell it to some random channel overseas. So we're working on a show that's been canceled for 2 months.
Jeez, man, that's agonizing, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're working. So
yeah, I guess
hey, we're getting paid. It's like
how much can you complain, right?
We can't complain because we're working, but there is that initial feeling of like, oh man, we thought this was going to be the one. Yeah. Because there are a lot of people, like you said, there's a lot of people in the business that get that one gig and then it just launches them into the stratosphere. I've had a couple friends that it's happened to, and it's amazing to watch. And it's one of those things where you just wish, on a daily basis, like someday I'm gonna get that needle in the haystack that's gonna take my career into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And in these shows, like some of them, like the first one I told you about, it took 3 days from the time we had the meeting to deliver the first episode. Some of them take 8 months, right?
Wow, yeah.
So you get hired for a show, then you're working on it for 8 months, and you're just grinding, countless revisions, rewrites, having to do music over and over again to establish your sound. Excuse me. You get on the air, and then 2 episodes in, it's gone.
Wow.
So like, and the entire time you're building up to that premiere date, and you're like, man, this show's really good. You're convinced, right? Like you're convinced that the show is really, it might not be. Like you're convinced that
like,
it is.
yeah, it's
Like
like,
you've
oh,
seen
it's
it.
genius.
Like you've seen it so many times that you're convinced it's the greatest show in the history of television. You're like, this is definitely the next Seinfeld. So you're doing it, and you're just, you got that belief. And some of them have actually been really good, like and yet, you work, and then it's gone.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, in the startup world, so I operate in the startup world mostly. Same kind of thing. You'll have these ideas and you'll obsess about them for months or years.
Right.
Spend a bunch of money and a bunch of time, and then they'll never, get birthed into reality, or they'll die in the early stages at some point or something like that. And you just
for a minute there, I felt like I was the king of the 3-episode series. So I had done so many shows that no one on this earth had seen. There's like a handful of people that had any idea what they were. Yeah. And it's funny, I've done shows with some of the biggest stars in the world, and none of these shows you would ever have heard of.
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy because it's like that for them too, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's like
absolutely.
I'm sure that, maybe, I don't know, you said, I think Seth Green or something, or probably maybe that was when he was coming out and like nobody knew about him at the time.
Yeah. No, he was big at the time.
Was he big at the, wow.
Yeah. This was supposed to be like his breakout like TV series, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, cool. So is there like an audition process? How does the...
Oh yeah, there's demo process. The demo process is, oh man, it's interesting. It really depends on the project, but more often than not these days, before you get a gig, you're having to more or less score the show as an audition. Yeah.
Can they use that? Or is it just like a dick thing? Or
they can. I mean, you typically sign a contract that gives away the rights to all the music and this and that. But where it gets interesting is when they start doing the cattle calls, where you're not the only one.
Wow.
So a lot of shows, they'll ask 10 guys to demo, and they'll just pick the best one.
Is it free, or do they pay you for that?
It's always free.
Wow.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah, right. Because how long does it take?
It takes a long time.
Yeah,
I take that back. I wouldn't say a long time. It's a lot of work, usually in a very short amount of time. Okay. So you're working for say 3-4 days, but not sleeping for those 3-4 days, right? Wow. Like you get this call and say, there's a new show, and hey, we'd love to have you demo for it. See what your take on the show is. And, it's Wednesday morning and we need it by Friday afternoon. Here's the episode. And so sleepless nights, you go through a couple sleepless nights, you crank out a demo, and then you find out that you're up against 10 other people that have been doing the same exact thing. And it can be pretty discouraging. I've become a little bit more selective in the shows that I will demo for based on past history. Like if I've worked with the person before and they know my work, to me that's silly. Like there's no reason why I should demo for someone that I've worked with, especially if I just finished working with them. But a lot of time that will come back and bite you in the ass. I did a movie a couple years ago with a director, and 2 weeks after we finished, he calls me and he's like, I got a new series on Disney Channel and I'd love to have you do it. It's great. Sign me up. He goes, okay, we'll have Disney contact you. Disney contacts me later that afternoon, asked me for a demo. And I kind of was scratching my head a little bit. I'm like, because the movie I had just done was also for Disney. So okay. I had literally just worked for them. Yeah. Right. So I'm scratching my head. I'm like, but I just did this movie for you guys, and the director is the same director, and he wants me on the show. So what's going on? What's going on here? Yeah. Can why don't we just cut to the chase and we'll just send the paperwork over and let's make this happen, right? Yeah. They wanted to do cattle call. Wow, and so they had 8-10 people submitting demos, and Jesus. I said no thanks. I was like, that's not how this should work, and I didn't get the gig.
Yeah.
because I didn't do a demo.
Yeah.
Fortunately, a good friend of mine got it. So,
Yeah.
at least went to someone that I knew was going to do a good job and take care of the director. And he ended up getting 3-4 years of work out of it. But it's crazy that some of the practices where doesn't matter necessarily what you've done. It's not even a "what have you done for me lately" type of thing. It's literally, you need to do this now.
Yeah.
What you've done in the past doesn't matter.
It almost sounds like there's like a disconnect in Disney or something. They just need to, like, on some paper somewhere it says like step 2 is have 10 guys submit tapes or some crap.
It could be that. I mean, it could also be a case of, to play devil's advocate from their point of view, maybe not all composers are necessarily equipped to do certain styles of music.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So what may have worked on one movie or a movie over here, that skill set that made that music happen on that particular project may not translate to something that is of a different nature. There may be a different style of music. There may be, and not everyone can do different styles of music. I know what my strengths are. I know what my weaknesses are. And so I get the sense that maybe from their point of view, it's more of a case of, okay, we know this guy's good, but can he do this? Mm-hmm. And I think there's some logic to that, because I know there are plenty of styles of music that I can do, but if certain ones were asked of me, it would be a struggle. Mm-hmm. I'm not a mariachi guy, right? Like it's not my deal. Yeah. I could do it and it wouldn't sound authentic, right? Mm-hmm. But there are things that I can do where it certainly is authentic, or there's certain things I can do where I can learn it fast enough to make it happen. But there's going to be certain styles of music that I'm not well versed in, that if that's what the show is revolved around, then at that point I understand why they wouldn't just hand the gig over.
Cool. You mentioned that you sometimes have to learn new styles.
Yeah.
How does that work? Do you just like listen to a bunch of stuff?
Listen, yeah.
Interesting. And would you sit there with the piano and just kind of
pretty much
like try to replicate different patterns?
Get the feel, get a sense of the instrumentation, get a sense of melodic components, harmonic stuff. Are things more minor? Are they more major? Like how it's really just a process of sitting down and listening. I did a show on ABC a couple years ago called Better Off Ted. It's probably been 10 years.
I love that show, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great show.
It's one of my favorite shows. Yeah, I love that show. Yeah.
A lot of the music in that show is Latin, right? We had to do this sort of Latin Esquivel type thing. And that was one of those things where sure I could fake it, but if we wanted to make it sound legit, really had to sit down and like study this stuff and listen to it. So there was before me and my partner who worked on it were writing, we just spent time just devouring music, just like put ourselves in that world for however long it was. I think we had a summer to figure it out because we did a pilot in the spring, got picked up. We had a couple months to kind of sort it out. So we spent a summer just devouring that type of music.
Yeah, I can hear the theme song in my head right now. I love that show. I really love that show. It's a funny show. If anybody out there has not watched this show, Better Off Ted, you need to watch it. It's so funny.
You should see my theme song pitch for that. It was like 15 pitches deep or something.
Really?
I have so many different variations of that particular piece of music.
So how does that work too? Like how many variations of different songs or themes or whatever do you come up with? Is it like
it's project
a volume
to project
thing?
Yeah. It really depends on it. There's no set rules to any of it. You might nail it the first time. You might it might take a few revisions. A good friend of mine who wrote the theme song for Modern Family, he used to have a studio right next to me. And I remember walking into his studio one day and he was on something like revision like 30 of this main title.
Wow.
Just going around in circles.
Wow.
Trying to tweak it and make it happen. And then sometimes it happens, you nail it the first time and it's easy.
So is it based on notes that you're getting back that you determine if you nail it, or is it something that is it you kind of hit it and you're like, that's it? Or how does that work? Like how do you know it's done, or how do you know it's the right version?
I think that's just an instinct thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And there's some games, like when you're pitching stuff, a lot of times you're pitching more than one thing. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole sales aspect to it of, where you're placing the best piece of music in the pecking order, and, what you're presenting as the best versus what is actually the best. And there's a bunch of different, part of my job is sales, at least initially. And, that's why I used to love watching Mad Men, because you would watch these advertising pitches, right? Yeah. And the advertising pitches were fascinating because how they would try and manipulate the situation to get what it is they're trying to sell across, right? And so a lot of what I do is that's another skill that I didn't mention earlier. Among having to be a jack of all trades, you also have to be a salesman, because you might have the best music in the world, but if you don't know how to pitch it, doesn't matter, because music can stand on its own, but ultimately people want to be reassured about what it is that they're listening to. They want to know that it has a purpose. They want to know what that purpose is. They want to know what your logic was behind certain decisions. And sometimes those things can be conveyed in just a piece of music, but sometimes it takes a little bit of reassuring, right? You got to be able to get in there and explain why you chose certain instruments.
Oh, interesting.
Or why, like I chose a flute because it's a much softer sound, and it seemed to represent such and such character and her sensibilities. And then I contrasted that with this instrument over here, and you find a way to dissect the piece of music to actually match what it is that's being presented on screen, because ultimately that's the purpose of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like the music is meant to complement and enhance what it is that's happening on screen. Mm-hmm. So it's, you have to be able to do a little bit of sales, because you got to be able to convey those ideas. You may have the greatest idea in the world with respect to your music and have, this grand vision of why your music is important when it's being played off what's on the screen. But if you're not able to tell that to people, they might not get it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how much of that is like trying to deconstruct your intuitions? Because I'm assuming when you sit down to write something, right, there's a lot of intuition that goes into it, and almost like things that you may not even consciously do, maybe different sounds and things based on whatever. So how much of the pitch is, and if you don't want to answer this, that's fine. How much of it is just like shit you make up to sell it? And then how much of it is stuff where it's like an intuition that you're trying to express that you think you had while you were writing it?
There's a little bit of both. I think by default, by the nature of the craft, you're going to obviously use your intuition and come up with certain things, right? But then there are certainly those times where you just need to get something off your plate to move on to the next task.
Yeah.
And so you might throw in a little bullshit, I mean, it's...
Yeah, okay.
It's not out of the realm of possibility, but sometimes if it's good bullshit's good bullshit, right?
It's just good, right?
Like I've convinced myself sometimes that was my intention all along.
But that's how you know you're doing a good job, right? It's like, I see how I did that.
You get on board with it. Man, the guy I used to work for, oh man, he was the king of it. He knew how to do it. It was great.
Oh, wow.
It was magical to watch.
So he's like Don Draper.
Because we'd sit there just be chuckling in the background oh my God, he's so full of crap.
Oh, that's hilarious, man. Oh, that's really funny.
But it was magic because you just watch. There's a process, right? Producers and directors and writers, they all want the same thing. They want their product to be good, right? They want to feel good about their product.
Yeah, that's a lot of it is just reassuring.
Right. And so there's a certain thing about being able to reassure. Ultimately, I'd like to think that the majority of what it is that I'm submitting and turning in is quality work. But the art of reassurance, I don't know if it's necessarily bullshit if you genuinely believe that what it is that what you have done is what was necessary to make the product better.
Yeah, it's just communicating it, right?
If the way that you communicate that to make someone reassured strays somewhat from the original intent, but it makes whoever it is that you're working for or with feel better and more comfortable with it, then, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, because ultimately in the end, what you're putting forth is your best effort with respect to the music that you're creating, and that the content that you're providing is serving its original purpose and intent.
No, I completely believe that. To kind of let you know, in a previous life, I worked in the ad industry.
Okay.
So a lot of it was a lot of that kind of stuff where it's the right work that the client needs. You just have to figure out a way to help them get out of their own way.
Yeah, exactly.
So they accept it.
Exactly.
It kind of sounds like it's like sleazy a little bit, but
it's
really just
it's not.
Yeah, it's just people have like weird ego things too, where they just they want the idea to come from them, or they want to have a part in it, and you have to kind of figure out a way to kind of help people get out of their own way so they can get the best quality stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
I've seen people pick things that are bad because they wanted to pick. So the recommendation is this, and you're like, man, this is the best thing, and then somebody picks something that's crap. Yeah. Because they want to be the person that decides because they're a genius and it's their project.
That is the hardest type of reassurance to do, by the way, when you know it's crap and it wasn't your decision, but but you still have to go through the process because it's like, okay, this is what this person wants, and it's well within their right. It's their project. This is their baby. They have a different view of what it needs to be. And, I think that's actually, it's interesting we're talking about this, because I think that one of the biggest struggles that I faced early on doing this job, and what most composers I know have struggled with, is how to separate yourself from your own personal pride in your work versus what the work is actually intended for. Right? Because ultimately you are providing something for someone else. And it was very hard for me in the early days to separate myself from that. It's like, wait, but I believe that this is the best thing for this project. So, and since this is my area of expertise, then obviously I'm right, you're wrong. Right? So and yet when the person that you're working with decides that they want something completely different, and maybe what in your eyes is something of lesser quality, that's a hard obstacle or a hard hurdle to overcome when you're trying to be creative, because you don't personally feel like you're putting your best foot forward, and yet you have to do it that way because that's what ultimately the person you're working with wants. And it took me some time. It took a couple years to figure that out.
So how did you figure it out? Was it just having it jammed down your throat enough?
Pretty much. Yeah.
To the point you're just like, if they want to use it, screw it. It's still good. Yeah. So do you have like a Scott's best mix that you go home and you kind of just sometimes pour a glass of whiskey and sit there and just play the stuff that just didn't get accepted by the client but was like your favorite stuff?
I do have my favorites, and I don't sit there and I don't try to make it a habit of just listening to my own stuff all the time, because it's already a very isolated existence as it is, and I hear my music all day long, so I don't oftentimes ever want to hear it ever again sometimes.
Interesting.
Just because I'm around it all day, it's like I want to hear other stuff. I want to hear.
Yeah.
A lot of times I don't even listen to music when I'm done with work because I'm like, I just want to hear some people talking. It's me and my dog all day long. Like
silence or people.
Silence or people. Like something other than music. But there are those moments like when, I finish up something and I maybe have a couple minutes before bed. And I do have a couple folders where I have some of the better stuff. And sometimes I'll do it not to go back and enjoy necessarily, but to remind myself that there's actually some possibilities there that I can write good material. Because a lot of times I don't, the music I'm having to write for some of these shows I work on is very odd requests, and the music isn't necessarily good, right? Like I had to do a piece of music today that was a knockoff of the song Dreamweaver, right? Which is a terrible song. Like it's an awful song.
Yeah.
I mean, some people might not agree with me, but it's. I mean, just from a production value standpoint, like you go, it just sounds like bad '80s pop music, right?
Yeah.
And I had to do a piece of music today that sounded like Dreamweaver.
So they like sent you the song, or
and they're like, we want to do this joke, and it's like this '80s pop thing and whatever, and so I'm writing a piece of music that sounds like bad '80s pop music, right? And I will never play it for anyone ever. It'll air on television, but I will never dig that up and play it for someone because it sounds awful.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
like
it's interesting.
It's a terrible piece of music.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry to any Dreamweaver fans out there. I know it's my own personal opinion of that piece of music, but for someone that I want to write good quality music, this and that, writing a knockoff of Dreamweaver without any vocals, it just sounds like really dated bad '80s pop music.
I mean, a lot of pop is bad music,
Well, yeah, so, especially you strip the vocals away, you strip the context away. I actually have a story about that where I got the opportunity to pitch for Big Bang Theory when it first came out.
Yeah,
I got an opportunity to pitch a theme song for Big Bang Theory, and it was a cattle call, like we talked about earlier. Yep. People were just submitting songs for that theme, and you get this one sheet, right, and it describes the show, and it lists who the characters are and the basic premise of the show, and then there's these musical ideas of what it is that they want, like what they're looking for. And the number, it makes me laugh because I remember reading this one sheet and I knew before we even submitted the demo that we weren't getting the gig. Because if we followed the one sheet, it was never going to happen, because the one sheet said, this is a show about really smart, nerdy guys right? And they're like science type guys. So we think the music should sound like She Blinded Me with Science.
Yeah, that's exactly what I heard in my mind when he said that.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Which you can picture the logic in the room when they're putting this one sheet together, right? It's like, we should do it's a show about nerdy science guys. She Blinded Me with Science. It's the perfect song.
Yeah.
And it is, if you have the context of the lyrics of that song and sort of the iconic status that song had at the time, right?
Yeah.
But if you strip away the lyrics from that song, it's a weird piece of music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we had to submit something that sounded like She Blinded Me with Science. We did it, knocked it out of the park. It sounded like I don't want to say perfect knockoff of it, but it was pretty darn close. It was like, man, if this is what they want, we nailed it. Yeah. But we knew the moment that we turned it in, we're like, we're never getting this gig, because this isn't what they want. They want the idea that She Blinded Me with Science conveys, right? The lyrical content. There's this like association with that song, with that idea of nerdy science, this and that. But they don't want She Blinded Me with Science. Like from a musical standpoint, that's not what they want. so like that type of thing happens all the time. So like today, I do this piece of music, the Dreamweaver thing, and to bring it back full circle, I do these types of things all day long. Like I'm doing these odd, they're very joke specific pieces of music. It might be a piece of country music. It might be this, it might be that. There's all these different types of music that I write on a daily basis that aren't things that I would necessarily listen to, but I have to do them anyways. So a lot of times I'll sit there, and when I'm done with work, I'll just pull up some of the old stuff and I'll listen to it just to remind myself that, hey, I can write good stuff.
I'm
right?
good. I'm good.
Like I know that I cranked out 8 pieces of crap today, but I know I have it in me.
I still got it.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like it's not like an ego thing necessarily. It's more of like a self-reassurance that I'm actually okay at what I do, and that, like, keep your eye on the prize, right? Like I got into this to write good music.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you listen to anything, for fun?
Yeah, I listen to everything, man.
Yeah.
I'm all over the map. I go through phases.
What's your phase now?
I've sort of dropped back into a little bit of EDM stuff, Porter Robinson, things in that world. It's so far away from what I do now, but it's like a world that I used to work in. So I tend to, and it'll be like that for a couple months, and then I'll drift back over to some rock and roll, or who knows, man. It's never. There's something that I hear on the radio or I hear in Spotify or whatever, and I'm just like, man, that's cool. And then go down the rabbit hole. And then 2 months later, I come up and I'm like, man, I just listened to like 2 months worth of indie rock or whatever it is, right? It's just it changes constantly.
So how do you find new stuff once you get on one of those benders, I guess, for lack of a better word?
It's just, it's the internet, man. It's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, just keep going.
Just keep going.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So there's no like Spotify.
Well, no, I'm Spotify. I love, man. Yeah. It's made music discovery so amazing.
Yeah. That's cool.
I love it.
Cool, man. Do you write any stuff for fun now outside of work? You got a band or?
I play in a band occasionally with some friends.
Yeah.
It's funny because we're all the guys I play with we're all composers. So like our schedules are turned upside down.
Yeah.
Right. So trying to get us all together.
You guys are probably really good though.
It's a good band. Yeah. I haven't written something just for fun in a while, and not necessarily because I haven't had time, but I've actually been playing more.
Okay.
Right. So like I used to play all the time. Right. Like I got into this because I wanted to play, I wanted to tour. And I played a lot of classical piano growing up, like practice for hours on end. Then I play bass, like listen to old rock and roll and stuff, and just learn every bass line on the planet. And working in the business, you just kind of, it's this weird thing where you're still playing every day because you're recording your own music, but you're recording like 8 measures at a time, right? So like I might have a cue that's 15 seconds long that I have to write. So I'll play on it, and it'll I guess fulfill that need to still play, sort of, but not really, because then you sort of lose that just sitting down and playing a song type thing. And so for me lately, instead of writing, I've gone back to just sitting down and playing, trying to play as much as I can whenever I can.
That's cool. So you just pull out some old stuff.
Get
out some music and play.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's which is interesting. It's been a while since I've done that, and it's been really nice. It's a reminder. It's like why. It's why me, and it's why most of the guys I know got into this. We all grew up playing music, and that's why we wanted to. We love music, and we're able to turn our ability to play and into a job where we can write and utilize our own skills playing. But in the end, I think all of us still want to just play. Like whenever I get together with guys to play, we're all like, man, wouldn't it be great if we could just go on tour for like 2 months?
Yeah. Just play and then
Let's go play and then come back to our lives.
Okay, cool, man. Well, I think that's kind of all I had for today.
Nice.
Thanks for spending some time.
Yeah.
This was great.
Absolutely.